Okay, have you ever read about a plane crash and thought, wait a minute, I get what happened,
Mm.
but what do some of these words even mean?
Yeah, like go around.
Exactly. Plane crashes. They have their own vocabulary, and
Uh,
we're diving into that today
we are.
using some recent events,
Right.
like that Delta flight in Toronto. We're going to
Oh.
break down the terminology, and I think it's really going to help us understand these events on a much deeper level.
Yeah, it's not just about morbid curiosity. It's
Right.
about becoming a more informed reader when you see these things in the news and, maybe even feel a bit safer or at least more knowledgeable on your next flight
Yeah.
when you hear these terms.
Yeah, it's kind of like you become a little bit more of an expert just by understanding the lingo.
Right. And what's interesting is the language itself often reflects the high stakes nature of aviation.
Yeah.
Every word, every phrase is chosen very carefully.
Yeah.
And even seemingly simple phrases can pack a lot of meaning.
Right, like in that Delta situation, the news kept mentioning fierce crosswinds. I mean, I know wind can be bad for planes, but what makes crosswinds particularly tricky?
So it's all about direction.
Okay.
Imagine you're trying to land a plane on a runway, but you have this strong wind pushing you sideways.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's essentially what a crosswind is. And in the case of this Delta flight, they were hitting a whopping 64 kilometers per hour.
Oh my gosh.
The reports describe the pilots as fighting against these winds,
Right.
and that really helps you visualize
Right.
the struggle they face trying to get that plane down
I
safely.
was gonna fighting against that's a really interesting choice of
It
words.
is.
It makes it sound like an active battle, not just steering a plane. Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. It really emphasizes the skill of the pilots
Right?
and the tremendous effort involved in maintaining control amidst these really powerful forces.
It's so true.
Sadly, despite their best efforts, one of the wings clipped the ground. And that leads us to another interesting term.
Okay.
The report said the wing took out the tail of the aircraft.
It's funny because "took out" sounds so casual
It
for
does.
such a serious event,
It
like
does.
you would use that in a sports game or something.
Yeah, you're right. It's very casual.
Yeah.
But in this context, took out means that it was disabled or destroyed by that impact.
Okay.
It's almost like aviation shorthand
Right.
to quickly convey the severity of the damage to
Wow.
the tail in this case.
So we've got crosswinds
Yes.
fighting against to describe the difficult conditions, took out to highlight the damage. I
Mhm.
mean, this is already helping me understand how word choice
Yeah,
can impact our understanding of these events.
absolutely. And this brings us to another incident, the Navy jet that malfunctioned over San Diego.
Right.
The crew made a split-second decision to eject, which thankfully saved their lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Split-second decision really underscores the urgency of that moment.
Yeah.
It wasn't a calculated choice.
Yeah.
It was pure instinct kicking in.
Yeah, it was react right away or
Exactly.
something terrible is gonna happen.
Wow, so they had mere moments to react before the jet went down.
Yeah, and that raises an interesting question.
Okay.
Could a go around have been an option in both of these situations?
See, that's what I was wondering about,
Yeah.
because I always hear about go-arounds in these plane crash discussions, but I'm like, "What does that mean?"
So when a pilot senses danger during a landing,
Okay,
whether it's wind or visibility issues or anything else really, they can initiate what's called a go around.
okay.
They basically abort the landing,
Oh, wow.
climb back up.
So, like, "Nope, not today."
Exactly.
Right.
And they'll reattempt the landing when conditions improve or when it's safer to do so.
So it prioritizes safety over rigidly sticking to the plan.
Exactly.
Wow.
Which is obviously the right call.
So in the Delta case, maybe a go-around could have prevented the wing strike.
Possibly.
But then that brings up another question. How do pilots decide when a go-around is necessary?
Right, because every second counts during landing.
Right, especially those final moments before touchdown.
Especially
Is there like a term for that crucial phase.
There is.
Okay.
You're hitting all the key points here.
Well, I'm trying.
You're doing great. Um, so pilots train extensively to make those judgment calls.
Yeah.
They consider wind speed and altitude and aircraft performance.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right about those final moments. We call that short final.
Short final.
It's the phase where the plane is aligned with the runway, it's descending, and it's committed to landing.
Okay.
Pilots need extreme focus
Yeah.
during short final
Yeah.
because even small errors
Ah,
can have major consequences.
okay. So short final is the high pressure zone
Pretty much.
where those split second decisions really come into play.
Right.
Wow. I'm starting to see how all these terms connect. They create like a timeline of a landing,
Yeah.
from the challenges of crosswinds to the decisions made in those final seconds.
That's a great observation. Yeah. And it's this interconnectedness that makes understanding the language so important
Right.
because it's not just about individual words,
Yeah.
it's about how they weave together
Just like a story.
to tell the story of these events.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about like the moments leading up to a potential crash.
Yeah.
But what about after an incident?
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole investigation,
Yeah.
right, to figure out what went wrong.
Absolutely. And these investigations are full of specialized language
Right.
that can sound like a code to the average person, but once you crack that code,
Hmm.
you gain a whole new understanding of the complexity involved.
Okay, so let's start with the infamous black box.
Okay.
I mean, it's mentioned in pretty much every plane crash investigation.
Yeah, it's always.
But I gotta admit, I'm not exactly sure what it is.
It's actually a bit of a misnomer.
Okay.
The black box is neither black nor a box.
Oh, really?
It's usually bright orange to help with recovery,
Yeah.
and it's more like a heavily protected cylindrical recording device.
Okay, so not what I pictured, but what does it actually record?
So it has two main components,
Go.
the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder.
Okay.
The cockpit voice recorder captures all the conversations and sounds in the cockpit,
Wow.
which gives investigators really crucial insights into what the pilots were doing and saying leading up to the crash.
That sounds like a gold mine of information.
Oh, it's incredibly valuable. Yeah.
So it can help determine if there were communication issues,
Right.
signs of panic, or any external noises that maybe played a role.
Exactly.
The flight data recorder, on the other hand, what does that do?
That tracks a ton of different parameters
Okay.
altitude, speed, heading, even engine performance.
So it's like a detailed log of everything the plane was doing throughout the flight.
Exactly.
Oh my
And
God.
by analyzing this data, investigators can reconstruct the plane's flight path,
Right.
identify any anomalies,
Wow.
and get a really clear understanding of what happened.
It's amazing how much information these black boxes hold.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
It's like unlocking secrets from the past.
They really are time capsules.
Yeah.
They provide really important clues for investigators to piece together the story of what happened.
Now, another term that always comes up in these investigations is air traffic control.
Hmm.
What exactly is their role?
They're like the unseen guardians of the skies.
Okay.
They direct aircraft movements,
Right.
make sure planes stay safely separated,
Okay.
and they provide guidance to pilots, especially during takeoff and landing.
So they're the ones constantly communicating with pilots,
Yeah,
giving them instructions and clearances and stuff.
exactly. Their communication is vital for maintaining order and safety, especially in busy airspace.
Right.
So, after a crash, investigators will very carefully review all of the communication between the pilots and air traffic control.
Looking for any miscommunications or missed instructions
Exactly, searching for any clues that might point to a breakdown in communication or procedural errors.
that might have contributed to the incident.
Right.
It sounds like a very detailed process.
It's incredibly detailed.
Yeah.
Yeah, requires a lot of expertise and a sharp eye for detail to connect all the pieces.
Speaking of connecting pieces, I've heard the term human factors mentioned in these investigations.
Yeah.
What does that even encompass?
So, human factors
Yeah.
is a broad term
Right.
that looks at the role of human behavior and limitations in these incidents.
Okay.
So it goes beyond just technical malfunctions
Right.
and considers things like pilot fatigue, stress levels, and decision making under pressure.
So it's acknowledging that pilots are human
Yeah.
and that even the best training can't completely eliminate the possibility of human error.
Precisely. Investigators look at pilot training records, experience levels, and even psychological factors
Wow.
that might have influenced their actions.
That's incredible.
They also examine things like maintenance procedures, communication protocols, the overall culture of the airline
Wow.
to see if any systemic issues could have contributed to the crash.
So it's a much more holistic approach,
It is.
recognizing that there's rarely just a single simple cause
You got it.
for these accidents.
It's about understanding the complex interplay between human actions, technical systems, and environmental factors.
This is all so fascinating, but also a little sobering.
It is.
It really highlights how much goes into keeping us safe in the air
Right.
and how even small mistakes can have tragic consequences.
It's a reminder that aviation safety relies on this delicate balance of technology, human expertise, and a constant drive to learn and improve.
So we've covered like the initial impact of a crash and,
Mhm.
the in-depth investigations that follow.
Right.
But there's this whole other piece we haven't really explored, and that's like the aftermath.
Yeah, we've been focusing a lot on, the technical aspects and the procedural stuff,
Yeah.
but we can't forget that these incidents have, really profound consequences for people.
Exactly. Beyond the data and the analysis, these are human lives
Mhm.
forever changed by these tragedies. And I imagine there's some legal ramifications as well.
Oh,
What
absolutely.
happens on that front?
So you often hear the term liability,
Right.
which basically means legal responsibility,
Okay.
and figuring out who's liable, who bears the blame after a crash can be a really long and complicated process.
So we're talking lawsuits and legal claims.
Exactly. Families of victims often seek compensation for their loss.
Of course.
And there might be claims related to property damage or, even environmental impact, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, that makes sense. But who are like the potential targets of these lawsuits?
It really varies from case to case,
Okay.
but some common parties involved include the airline itself,
Right.
the aircraft manufacturer, maintenance companies,
Right.
and even in some cases, air traffic control.
Wow. So when investigators are piecing together what happened, they're not just looking for the technical cause of the crash.
Right.
They're gathering evidence that could be used in court.
Exactly. Everything from those black box recordings to maintenance logs, pilot training records, air traffic control communications, all of that can play a role in determining who's ultimately liable.
Wow. It's a stark reminder that these investigations have consequences far beyond just understanding what happened.
They do.
They can impact the lives of a lot of people.
Absolutely. And while all the legal battles are unfolding, there's also the emotional toll to consider.
Right.
The impact on families and friends of victims and even on the broader community can be devastating.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the technical details and the legal stuff
Yeah.
that we forget there are human stories of loss and grief behind every incident.
And those stories often don't make it into the news reports.
Right.
The media attention fades. But for those who are directly affected by these tragedies, the scars remain long after the headlines are gone.
It makes you realize that these events aren't just isolated incidents.
No.
They ripple outwards and they touch so many lives in really profound ways.
And that's why it's so important to approach these conversations with a lot of sensitivity and respect for all those who've been affected.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by how much we've learned just by exploring the language of plane crashes.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much language can reveal? We
Yeah.
often take it for granted, but it shapes our understanding of these events. And and it reveals those hidden nuances and connects us to the human stories.
Yeah, we started with terms like crosswinds and split-second decision,
Yeah.
and then we went into the world of investigations with black box and human factors,
Mm.
and now we're reflecting on the aftermath with liability and the emotional toll. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and hopefully by understanding this language a bit better, we're all a bit more equipped to engage with these events in a more informed and compassionate way.
I think that's a great takeaway. The next time we see a news report about a plane crash, we can look beyond the headlines, consider the complexities, and remember the human cost.
That's the goal. Knowledge is power.
That's so true.
And the more we understand, the better we can navigate these difficult topics and appreciate the efforts being made to make air travel safer for everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
We hope it's been insightful and maybe even a little empowering.
Yeah.
And remember, the learning doesn't stop here.
It doesn't.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deeper into the world around you.